This is Dr. S. the Legend. He's back. I want to talk about pardons today. Before I get to pardons, I want to discuss the present situation in Venezuela, which took place today on Saturday, January 3rd. Give you a little background. This is the issue of sending troops into Venezuela and removing the President Maduro and bringing him back to the United States and trying him for drug trafficking. Now, there's precedent for this. In 1989, the United States sent troops into Panama for the sole purpose of removing the president at the time. His name was Manuel Noriega. We brought him back to the United States in 1992, and we tried him for drug trafficking. And we convicted him, and he got a 40-year sentence. It ultimately was reduced to 30 years. And the issue came up in court whether or not the United States had the right to go into Panama and bring back Manuel Noriega. And the court ruled, this is the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of Florida, they ruled that, quote, jurisdiction is not defeated by abduction. And they said no U.S. laws were violated. So this sets a legal precedent for the United States government to capture leaders indicted on criminal charges. And there's other precedents for this. For example, President Obama sent troops into Pakistan, not to capture Osama bin Laden, but to kill him. We also have examples from President Kennedy back in October of 1961 for creating a blockade around Cuba because the Soviets were putting offensive nuclear missiles on Cuba, and that's very close to the United States. We also have the issue of the law behind it, and we're talking here about what's known as the Monroe Doctrine. It goes back President Monroe, 1823, which says that the United States, our sphere of influence, is in the Western Hemisphere, that European powers should stay out of the Western Hemisphere. And then it was added by President Teddy Roosevelt, called the Roosevelt Corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, somewhere around 1903, which said essentially, basically, we're going to police our hemisphere, and particularly Latin America. Now there's going to be criticism of Donald Trump's action, because anything Donald Trump does, he gets criticism for. Well, he didn't consult Congress. Well, excuse me, there's 535 members of Congress. If he had to consult members of Congress, it would have taken months. Plus, President Obama did not consult Congress. John Kennedy did not consult Congress. President Bush initially did not consult Congress when he went in and got Manuel Noriega. So we're going to see what happens, but the law is on the side of the United States, on the side of the president's action, because it's lawful. The courts have said so, and foreign policy in the United States is a proven factor. So I want to move on. Another issue in current events is the issue of fraud in Minnesota, conducted primarily by people who have come from a place called Somalia. Somalia is in East Africa. It is what is known as a failed state. They have been in civil war since approximately 1991 to the present. The country is ruled by warlords. They have a medieval mentality there. In the early 1990s, there was a major famine and humanitarian crisis that took place in Somalia. And the United Nations, other countries, and the United States, we sent food into Somalia to stop the famine. But what happened is the warlords stole the food and didn't give it to the people. So our troops attempted to establish some sort of humanitarian means to distribute the food and get it away from the warlords. As a result, the United States came in conflict with the warlords. And there was a battle that took place October 3rd and 4th, 1993. It's in a book called Black Hawk Down, in the movie Black Hawk Down. And 18 U.S. servicemen were killed and 73 were wounded. As a result of this, President Clinton withdrew troops, U.S. troops, from Somalia in 1994. All UN troops were removed in 1995. And this is known as the Somalia Syndrome, where basically certain areas of the world, it's not worth the aggravation to go in and try to solve a problem that's not solvable. Somewhere along the line, people from Somalia came to the United States, and they came to Minnesota. Now, I am not surprised they went to Minnesota or were invited to Minnesota, because the people in Minnesota are very nice people and humanitarian, and they wanted to do very best for the Somalian refugees. But there's the old principle, no good turn gets a good result. You get a bad result. And as a result, we see billions of fraud taking place in Minnesota. Money at the state and federal level being stolen. That's fraud. To date, I mean, this is not opinion, this is fact. 98 people have been charged in this fraud scheme, of which 85 are Somalis, 64 have been convicted. Department of HHS has frozen all child care payments to Minnesota and perhaps other states now due to the extent of the fraud. Small Business Association has frozen $400 million in loans in Minnesota because of suspected frauds. And this has not only affected the daycare centers, but food distributions, food stamps, housing, and services for those that have mental issues. And this, I'm seeing numbers as high as $9 billion. It could be higher. And we'll have to see what happens in Minnesota. And it looks like maybe other parts of the United States. No good deed goes unpunished. That was the term I was looking for. The people in Minnesota are very nice people, but they're too nice. And they let this fraud fester and continue. Now I'm going to move on to talk about the main subject today, which is the issue of pardons. Sometimes it's known as clemency. We also have the term of commutations and reprieves. It comes from the Constitution. A pardon is a forgiveness for a crime, total forgiveness. A commutation is a shortening of a sentence. Basically, your sentence is ended and you get out of jail or prison. And a reprieve is a stay of execution. So it has become a controversy in the waning days of the Biden administration. President Biden issued what I call blanket or global pardons to Hunter Biden, members of the Biden family, and other individuals. Let me read to you the pardon that was given to Hunter Biden, the son of Joe Biden. For those offenses against the United States which he has committed or may have committed or taken part in during the period from January 1, 2014 through December 1st, 2024, including but not limited to all offenses charged or prosecuted. This is a 10-year period. And the important thing is, not only is it things that he was charged with, but things that he could be charged with. This has never happened. There's one exception, which I'll go over shortly. But this is unprecedented. These global pardon for everything possible. Where did the language of this come from? Well, it came from the Richard Nixon pardon. Let me read to you the Richard Nixon pardon. Back in August of 19, well, a little later, after August of 1974, quoting, "All offenses against the United States which he, Richard Nixon, has committed or may have committed or taken part in during the period from January 20th, 1969 through August 9th, 1974. This concerned the Watergate scandal. So this was the one general or global pardon. This covered a 5.5-year period. The Biden pardons cover a 10-year period. Hunter Biden was charged with tax and gun charges. But even the Nixon pardon, everybody knew that what he was going to be charged with. He was going to be charged with obstruction of justice. In the case of Hunter Biden and others, we don't even know what the crimes they may have been charged with in the future. You know, jaywalking, who knows? Now, this applies to the President of the United States to grant pardons or commutations. It only includes federal offenses, not state or civil offenses. If it's state, it's up to the governor of the state. Now, this is related to the Constitution, Article 2, Section 2. Quoting, "He," the President, "shall have power to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States." It has always been the case, up until maybe Nixon and the Biden family, pardons are specific to a particular crime. It has almost never occurred to get a blanket or global pardon. Now, the person that is pardoned still has on their record that they've been arrested or maybe convicted. So then you got to go into court and you got to get an expungement to have your record removed. So again, pardon is forgiveness. Let me just mention some of the statistics concerning pardons in recent presidents. During George W. Bush, the younger, he granted 200 pardons. Bill Clinton, 459. Barack Obama, 1,927. And the first Trump administration was 237. The number I have for Joe Biden, you ready for this? 10,489. Let me repeat that. 10,489 pardons and commutations. Now, how do you get a pardon? There's two ways to get a pardon. One is you apply to the pardon office, and then they transfer it to the president. The second way is just go directly to the president and ask for a pardon. Under the case known as U.S. versus Wilson, for some strange reason, you can refuse a pardon. I don't know why you would, but you're allowed to refuse it. And maybe a few people have. When Bill Clinton was president on his last day in office, he gave a good number of controversial pardons on January 20th, 2001. He pardoned, let me just go through a couple of these individuals. Linda Evans and Susan Rosenberg. They were part of the Weather Underground. They were charged and given long sentences, 40 years and 58 years, for planning to bomb the Capitol, for having weapons and explosives. A guy by the name of Mark Rich, who was wanted for tax evasion. He had fled to Switzerland. He owed the United States about $50 million, and President Clinton pardoned him, even though he wasn't even in the United States, he was in Switzerland. He pardoned his brother Roger Clinton for being convicted of possession of cocaine. He pardoned Patricia Hearst. She had been involved in bank robberies. President Carter had commuted her sentence. It's kind of a long story. She kind of was the poster child for what is known as the Stockholm Syndrome. She was kidnapped and then started hanging out with the kidnappers. Clinton also pardoned 16 members of an organization called FALN. They had planted 120 bombs. They had plans to bomb the Capitol. And after this particular pardon, The Senate voted 95-2, and the House voted 311-41 to criticize Bill Clinton for granting this pardon. Clinton also pardoned a guy by the name of Mel Reynolds, a Democrat from Illinois. He had been convicted, get this now, 12 counts of sexual assault of children. And this is not good. Clinton got a lot of pushback for some of these controversial pardons. After the Civil War, President Johnson gave a mass pardon called an amnesty for Confederate troops. Not all of them. Then we fast forward, President Carter granted an amnesty on January 21, 1977, for those who had evaded the draft to go to Vietnam. There were, I got numbers here, it was Executive Order 11967. There were 200,000 approximately people that had evaded the draft and went and just didn't report. And there were about over 350,000 that evaded and were never charged. Most Americans, the vast majority of Americans, did not approve of Carter's amnesty program. Somewhere upwards of 100,000 of these evaders went to Canada. Some of them returned. Some of them did not return to the United States. Now, back to President Biden. On January 19, 2025, that's a day before he's leaving office, he granted blanket pardons to Dr. Fauci. You remember him. General Mark Milley, members of the House Select Committee, Hunter Biden. These are these blanket pardons. James Biden, his brother, and his wife Sarah. Francis Biden, another brother. Valerie Biden Owens, the sister of Joe Biden. And John Owens, the brother-in-law of the sister. All of these people were given blanket pardons. So, then on December 12th, backwards a few days, he granted approximately 1,500 commutations and pardons. Then, going fast forward a few days, on January 17th, 2025, he granted almost 2,500 commutations and pardons. And then going back a little further in history, on October 6th, 2022, he granted 6,500 pardons and commutations. Over 10,000 pardons. Now, the main issue is, did he do these with the auto pen? That means he used a device that he didn't sign it personally. And could he have the time to go to review all of these pardons? And we'll have to see what happens in the future, whether the Supreme Court will ever get a case, particularly whether the auto pen can be used for pardons, and whether or not you can grant a blanket pardon for a period of time in which no one has any idea whether you did anything or didn't. In other words, you're being pardoned for something you may have done in the future. I don't think it's legal or constitutional. My legal opinion as a lawyer. Let me go over, I'm done with pardons for the moment. I'm going to go through a number of cases here, a couple cases that are important. And the first one is called Donald Trump versus Ashton Orr, decided November 6th, 2025. This concerns passports. This was an executive order by Donald Trump. Previous to this, under the Biden administration, if you wanted a U.S. passport, you could put on there whatever gender you wanted. You could put male, female, or X. So then, let me read from the Supreme Court here. This case concerns an executive branch policy requiring all new passports to display an individual's biological sex at birth. This was done by President Trump. United States District Court for the District of Massachusetts enjoined the government from enforcing the policy. The First Circuit Court declined to stay the injunction. In other words, Trump said you got to have male or female biological sex, and the court said no, and then it reached the Supreme Court. And they said displaying passport holders' sex at birth no more offends equal protection principles than displaying their country of birth. In both cases, the government is merely attesting to a historical fact without subjecting anyone to differential treatment. Nor is anyone likely to prevail, meaning those that protest, in arguing that the State Department acted arbitrarily and capriciously by declining to depart from presidential rules that Congress expressly required it to follow. There's a law, believe it or not, that says biological gender on passports, 22 U.S.C. 211A. And the court said, for these reasons, the government is likely to succeed on the merits. What does this mean? Well, the court was only interested in removing the injunction and allowing only biological sex on your passport. But they're saying here that if the case proceeds and gets to them on the merits, on the total legality, that they're probably going to rule that you got to put biological sex on passports. Period. End of sentence. In light of the foregoing, the government will suffer irreparable injury. So therefore, from now on, after the date of this order, on November 6, 2025, and maybe prior to this, you got to have biological sex on your passport. There has to be some kind of standard. Now I want to go over to one other case, one other decision, and this concerns the case that was brought against Donald Trump and others in Atlanta, Georgia, for somehow interfering in the election of 2020, and Donald Trump and others were indicted. And I'm going to go through the facts of the case. Basically, I'm going to tell you right now, the case is done, it's over, it's gone. And something may further happen. Stand by for this. It reached the final part by a district attorney, Peter J. Skandakis. I'm reading his opinion on November 26, 2025. He was the last result of the case. And I will read you some of the fact scenario involving this case and what happened. So, on August 14, 2025, a Fulton grand jury indicts President Donald Trump and 18 co-defendants on 41 criminal counts, including RICO. RICO is racketeering. And it was assigned to Fulton County Superior Judge Scott McAfee. On March 15, 2024, Judge McAfee issues an order requiring that either District Attorney Willis and her entire office recuse themselves from the case, or that Special Prosecutor Nathan Wade withdraw from the case. So Wade resigned after the order was filled. You got to understand that the District Attorney Willis appointed her boyfriend, Nathan Wade, paid him a lot of money, and Judge McAfee made the decision one or the other had to leave the case. Then on December 19, 2024, the Georgia Court of Appeals reversed Judge McAfee's order and disqualified District Attorney Willis and her office from the entire case based upon a significant appearance of impropriety. They messed up. On January 8, 2025, District Attorney Willis files a petition with the Georgia Supreme Court seeking certiorari to review the Court of Appeals ruling. On September 16, 2025, the Supreme Court declines to hear District Attorney Willis's petition. So, let me just stop here for a second. So this attorney is reviewing what has happened. Willis, the district attorney, the boyfriend Wade, and the whole district attorney's office in Atlanta, they're all thrown off the case. They're done. As of January 8th, 2025. On October 8th, 2025, Justice McAfee grants motion for additional time to find a prosecutor and extends the deadline to November 14th. October 29th, the Atlantic Judicial Circuit District Attorney's Office. All right, make a long story short, nobody would take the case any further in Georgia except this one attorney, I can't even pronounce his name, Sklandakis, I think. So this is his opinion. I'm going to read you his opinion. He's the last resort before the case is done. And he says there's no realistic prospect that a sitting president will be compelled to appear in Georgia to stand trial on the allegations in this indictment. Donald J. Trump's current term as President of the United States of America does not expire until January 20th, 2029. By that point, 8 years will have elapsed since the phone call at issue. There was a phone call the president made. And even if by some extraordinary circumstances, President Donald Trump were to appear in Georgia on January 21st, 2029, the day after his term concludes, an immediate jury trial will be impossible because of the immunity issues under a Supreme Court case called Trump versus the United States. This is why Special Counsel Jack Smith's federal investigation and prosecution would have been the most appropriate avenue to determine whether the actions of those involved were crimes that would have been proven beyond a reasonable doubt. So he's saying that this case had no business being in Atlanta, Georgia. It should have been in Washington, D.C. Furthermore, in my professional opinion, the citizens of Georgia are not served by pursuing this case in full for another 5 to 10 years. So we're ending the case. Plus, he says it's not unlawful to dispute an election. Happens all the time. Now, this is very important. I'm not sure how to take this small paragraph. And but for the plan driven by select individuals meeting in Washington, D.C. Now, I don't know if he's saying this is normal or whether this is a conspiracy. I'll read this again in the full context. And but for the plan driven by select individuals meeting in Washington, D.C., we would not have Fulton County grand juries selectively determine who should be charged with providing false statements to legislative committees convening on state capitol grounds, nor we've had individuals encouraged by the false cries of voter fraud to harass and threaten an innocent poll worker. Again, none of this belonged in Atlanta County, Georgia. Overt acts such as arranging a phone call, issuing a public statement, tweeting to the public, texting someone to attend hearings, answering a 63-minute phone call without providing the context of that conversation, just to name a few examples, are not acts I would consider sufficient to sustain a RICO case, charging someone. The criminal conduct alleged in Atlanta Judicial Circuit prosecution was conceived in Washington, D.C., not the state of Georgia.
10 seconds.
It didn't belong in Georgia. Case closed, case ended. This is Dr. S. the Legend. I'm signing off. I'm just letting you know that this is the name of my podcast, Conversations with Dr. S. the Legend. If you want to contact me, there's my email. Ladies and gentlemen, email, hello. And if you like the paintings can all be reviewed at this website. If you like rodeos, western paintings, or cowboys. Again, Dr. S. the Legend signing off.